Hello and welcome to All Oceans. This week we're talking about ghost fishing. Ever since nets began to be cast out at sea eons ago, more and more fishing gear has been entering our oceans. What may come as a surprise to some is just how much of this gear remains in the water, lost, torn away or simply abandoned. One report, jointly issued by the Food and Agriculture Organization and the UN Environment Programme, estimates that 640,000 tonnes of abandoned nets are spread across the world's oceans each year, comprising up to 10% of oceanic litter. Viewed from below, fishing nets appear as thin veils waving slowly in the currents. Imagine a fishing net getting snagged on a reef. It tears and gets detached from the fishing vessel. When caught on a reef, nets don't only catch fish, turtles, crustaceans, birds and marine animals, they also destroy hard and soft corals, wiping out complete ecosystems while swaying in the current. That net can remain wrapped around the reef for many decades, ensnaring marine animals. In more technical terms, ghost nets can be called abandoned, lost or discarded fishing gear, ALDFG, but for this podcast we'll call them by their colloquial name, ghost nets. Ghost fishing is what fishing gear does when it's been lost or dumped. And ghost gear devours sea life with an insatiable hunger. Each year, more than 100,000 whales, dolphins, seals and turtles get caught in abandoned fishing nets. It's estimated that lost tangle nets catch around 5% of the total commercial fish catch globally. That's tens of millions of fish. Scuba divers will know about ghost nets. I've personally taken nets out of the water and freed sea creatures from lost nets, and so have many other divers. Ghost fishing happens in a number of ways. Many commercial fishermen use gill nets. These are fine nylon nets that get caught in a fish's gill as they swim into them. They are held up in the sea by flotation buoys along one edge. In this way they can form a vertical wall bigger than football pitches at hundreds of metres long, where any fish within a certain size range can be caught. If this net is abandoned for any reason, it'll drift around the ocean currents, entangling a wide variety of marine organisms and eventually sink under the weight of dead animals. As this biomass breaks apart at the bottom of the sea, the nets shake their load and drift upward again, and the cycle continues. Made of durable materials, modern ghost nets can take up to 600 years to break down. Fishing nets and lines wrap themselves up on reefs, shipwrecks or rocks, maiming, drowning or simply starving hundreds of thousands of animals. Hundreds of kilometres of nets get lost every year in this way. Abandoned gear makes no distinctions, capturing fish, mammals, birds, sharks, rays and invertebrates. Crabs and lobsters are scavenging bottom dwellers. They will also venture inside an abandoned lobster pot for their predecessors' remains, and so will also perish in these traps. An abandoned lobster pot can be a self-baiting trap that goes on for a long time. When animals become tangled in ghost gear, they sometimes drown or starve as they try to escape. Others face longer-term suffering as they grow and the lines or nets cut into their bodies. Young seals are curious animals, which can lead to them playing with fishing nets. Seals trapped in netting are unable to move as it tightens around their neck or flipper. Seabirds make nests with small pieces of netting. They can then get entangled in these, which prevent them from flying, nesting or diving. Whales, dolphins and porpoises get entangled and killed as they swim around amongst floating ropes, nets and lines. Endangered leatherback turtles migrate to UK waters in summer to feast on jellyfish. They are at risk of becoming entangled in lost or discarded rope and netting. 50 or 60 years ago, nets were commonly made from biodegradable hemp or cotton. With the advent of synthetic, degrade-resistant materials such as nylon, nets can now remain active in the water for hundreds of years. Some plastics can remain in the marine environment for up to 600 years. When gear does finally break apart, further damage is done when marine animals eat plastic particles and polyurethane chemicals leach into the water. Unfortunately, there is little immediate incentive to use gear that's biodegradable. Polyurethane nets became popular in fisheries largely because they were so resistant to breaking down. So, what's the solution? New technologies to reduce ghost gear's longevity in the ocean is vital to solving the problem. The difficulty lies in convincing fishermen to take on added expenditure of replacing nets more often. A new study published in the Journal of Animal Conservation describes some promising tests done with biodegradable fishing nets. During lab testing, the biodegradable nets had a lower breaking strength and were stiffer than nylon monofilament nets, but during actual fishing they performed similarly to regular nylon nets and started to biodegrade after 24 months in seawater. This is only a first step. More testing needs to be done, and the biodegradable materials could no doubt be improved to better match the performance of conventional nets. But these tests were promising enough to show that this solution could be pursued further. In the United States, federal law mandates both escape vents and biodegradable panels that allow lobsters and other animals to escape ghost fishing traps. Also, in areas where there's high boating traffic, trap-free lanes can be designated so as to avoid entanglement. While some countries are following these examples, progress is slow. Though the problem of ghost fishing has no foreseeable solution as of yet, there are many groups out there like Ghost Fishing, California Sea Dock and Fishing for Energy that are doing commendable work. In August, in the Dutch North Sea, divers recently cleaned their 100th shipwreck of lead, lines and net, a milestone in the Protect a Wreck initiative. Since 2010, the Olive Ridley project freed and rehabilitated 51 endangered turtles trapped or injured in nets in the Maldives, illustrating how such gear puts added strain on an already endangered species. In Mediterranean waters off the Turkish coast, a clean-up effort to rehabilitate ecosystems damaged by ghost nets is currently underway. Ghost Nets Australia has a partnership with indigenous groups working in the area to remove them. In 2009, a group of divers created the Ghost Fishing Foundation, which brings scuba divers together to find and retrieve abandoned fishing gear. They started in the Dutch North Sea, recovering nets from the ocean floor and some from shipwrecks. Sometimes they use large cranes to salvage especially large chunks of netting. They now have projects in other countries like Belgium, Croatia, Malta and the US. Another group, the Healthy Seas Initiative, works to convert ghost nets into material for consumer goods such as socks, swimwear and carpets. Whilst ghost net cleanup projects are primarily small, a few large-scale ones do exist. The Washington state, aided by a $5.4 million grant from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, began the Derelict Fishing Gear Removal Program in Puget Sound shallow waters in cooperation with the Northwest Straits Foundation. The project has to date removed 4,500 fishing nets and 3,081 crab pots. However, preventing gear being lost in the first place has proven to be far less expensive than retrieval from the depths. Washington State, for instance, had to spend approximately $190 to retrieve a single crab pot. Though fishermen are the source of ghost nets, they have perhaps the strongest investment in fisheries sustainability. As I mentioned earlier, lost tangle nets catch around 5% of the total commercial catch globally. According to the California Sea Dock Cleanup Initiative, one abandoned net killed $20,000 of Dungeness crabs in 1 year. Removing the net cost $1,358. Fishermen sometimes abandon worn-out nets because it's so often the easiest way to get rid of them. One possible solution is to mark nets with electronic and acoustic tags, which would make it easier to recover and easier to hold those who discard them more accountable. However, regulations are currently very weak. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, there are, quote, few requirements by governments for ownership marking on gear, and no international regulations, guidelines or common practices exist for the marking of fishing gear deployed outside of national jurisdictions, end quote. Another area that needs attention is shoreline collection facilities. Whether due to barriers to access, unwanted costs or absence of facilities, not enough used gear is making its way to shore. While it's difficult to build consensus and take action to clean international waters, fostering a sense of stewardship could motivate people to repair coastal areas in their own countries and localities. I visited a successful net recycling scheme in Newlyn, Cornwall, UK, yet in many countries the infrastructure simply does not exist to create these programs. Ultimately, any guidelines and regulations will need to be rigorously enforced and monitored, something that is known to pose substantial challenges in most fisheries. Since much fishing takes place in international waters, implementing comprehensive regulation on ghost nets has proven difficult. The 1973 International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships is a start in curtailing marine pollution, but does not adequately address the problem of ghost fishing gear. When it comes to ghost nets, the best long-term outcome for ocean conservation will probably be the creation of global regulation mandating biodegradable nets, along with enforcement of the rule. Always a problem out at sea. In the meantime, fishing boats could make sure their nets are attached extra securely and never dump old damaged nets into the sea. If you see ghost gear when out on a beach, please pick it up. It's quite safe, and lost or abandoned fishing equipment is one of the biggest threats to animals in our ocean. That's all from me, Jules Powers. I'll be back with another edition of All Oceans next week. Bye-bye.